Which shoe is better to hoop in, the Nike PG6 or the Nike Zoom Freak 3? Today we're putting the newest models from Paul George and Giannis Antetokounmpo's shoe lines with Nike head to head to see how they compare. But really quick, if this is your first time checking us out, feel free to drop a follow or subscribe wherever you're watching and give this video a like. We would greatly appreciate that. So starting off with the box and the price, an alternate colorway name for this is the Valentine's Day PG6, which does explain a little bit why they have a Cupid kind of shooting an arrow on the box. So it is a cool box on these, but I don't expect them to all come this way. And then switching it over, Giannis' shoes come in an orange box with his player logo kind of off-centered in the bottom corner. And as for pricing, it is crazy that the PG6 is still only retailing for $110. That's pretty much what his line has stayed at this entire time, while other lines kind of tend to jump up in price. And the Zoom Freak 3s are going to be just above these PG6s at $120, but still two shoes here, they're going to fall on the much cheaper side, so I do like that. So doing a quick rundown for the appearance of these shoes and starting off with the colorways, today we're checking out the Nike PG6 All-Star Weekend versus the Zoom Freak 3 in this Nike color scheme. So starting off with the PG6, first for the colorway, I think these are super clean. Like, you're gonna have some butterflies on there that really get your attention. And then I do like the floral overlays that kind of show up on the upper. It's also gonna be tied into the lacing setup too. And then staying there, you have a basketball with an arrow running through it that kind of ties everything back into the colorway name again. And a lot of different materials and textures are used on this upper, and I'm a fan. I mean, I'll get more into the specifics on like the material section, but I do think it spices these up. And honestly, the PG6 was due for a little revamping. A few years back, the PG4 shocked pretty much everyone, and they went with a zipper running up the middle of the shoe. I don't think any active shoe lines have like really used that kind of setup before, but I mean, then last year on the PG5, they kind of simplified that model up a lot, and it was still a really nice shoe to play in, just not a lot to look at. But the PG6 looks nice. I even like the PG logo that kind of extends up from the bottom, kind of peeks onto the side of the midsole, and the reverse Nike swoosh just looks really sick on these. But now switching it over to check out the Zoom Freak 3s, Nike did add the strap to this year's model that wasn't there on the 2s, which does give these a nice added touch. They even put his nickname on the inside part of it, so I mean, the strap is always a really nice feature to add. It just kind of opens up some creative options, I think. But that's really the only piece that they switched up on this year's design compared to last year's that I did like. The reverse swoosh is like, it's a little bit too small. I definitely don't like it as much as I do on the PG6. I think it looks a little bit cleaner there. And then the midsole setup is a little bit funky with the like curves, in my opinion. You are going to get some Nike text on the tongue to kind of reference that colorway name. So, you know, I mean, not a bad look, but it's also not going to be one of my favorites. But now let's go ahead and see how each of these shoes hold up on the court. So getting into more of the materials and the performance side for these shoes, and starting off with the cushioning, last year's PG5 had a full-length air dot strobel that was amazing to play in, and the PG5s actually made my top 5 shoes to hoop in last year. I just thought that shoe was all around really nice, and cushioning was part of the reason why. But Nike did switch it up on the setup for this year's PG6 model. You're going to get a full-length Nike React midsole meant to give you a smooth, soft, and responsive feel, and you're also going to have a TPU shank in the midsole to kind of help with support and stability, but I'll get more into that in a second. So initially, the PG6 doesn't feel quite as soft as last year's model. I know the PG5s used some memory foam that molded to your foot over time, so they were like extremely soft from the jump. Then that soft feel would kind of fade a little bit over time as they conform to your foot. These don't really do that, but I mean, the sock liner does feel padded, which enhances the comfort even a little bit more, and the rest of the upper feels nice and easy to move around in too. So I wouldn't say they feel exactly like the PG5s. I mean, flatly they don't, because you do have different stuff being used here, but maybe a little bit more breaking time on these. But overall, the cushioning is still a really nice feel. They're responsive and well balanced from front to back, and honestly, I do kind of like shoes better that way compared to like loading up the forefoot with cushioning pods, kind of leaving out the back half of the shoe sometimes like some other lines do, such as the one that we're checking out today. So now switching it over to the Zoom Freak 3s, they did make some improvements to the comfort on this year's design just compared to the 2s. The front half of the shoe is going to be hollowed out, and that's where you'll have 2 Zoom Air units, and like I was just referencing, that is going to account for most of the soft feel within this shoe. You're not going to get a lot of cushioning in the back half, kind of around the heel, and honestly, that's not a huge deal because a lot of the time is spent on your toes anyways. But it still is pretty clear whenever you have these on. They don't feel quite as balanced as the PG6, but they still feel pretty good. For the materials and the support, the upper on the PG6 has a few different materials and like textures at play, just like I was saying in the appearance section. The toe box is going to be a little bit softer, more so than the middle portion of the upper, which is kind of like a transparent textile or like a synthetic design. It feels a little bit more scratchier, just has like a rougher surface than the toe box. And then around the heel, you're going to have like a softer plush feel. That's also going to be what makes up the sock liner too. And I think these came out really nice. Nike put a little bit more into this year's model for the appearance, and I think that kind of trickled down to the materials being used too. And then looking at the support, one thing that these lost was a pretty noticeable outrigger that showed up on the PG5s that was there to kind of help brace your foot, just give you a wider base with balance. And the PG5s also had some patches on the midsole that kind of ran up the shoe to help a little bit with the lateral containment, and you won't find anything like that on these, but you do have an outsole shank that kind of helps keep the shoe intact. And then along with that, the laces are going to feed through some bands that wrap over your foot. Whenever you tighten those, that's just going to help keep your foot locked in and stable over the footbed. And the upper is pretty thin. That is going to help with ventilation though. These do have really nice airflow, but it doesn't negatively affect the support, which is a good thing. And the middle portion of the upper that kind of looks like that netting is honestly pretty sturdy. But now switching it over to the Zoom Freak 3s, Nike did add the strap for the first time to Giannis's line. But I mean, other than that, the materials are pretty solid, but they're really nothing to brag about. The upper material is really light, and that obviously that's going to be good ventilation, just like for the PG6s. But I mean, I will say it does kind of make the support feel a little less impressive on this design because of that, especially whenever you're comparing it to their previous model. But the materials used, they just don't give you the most secure feel. The upper can move around a little bit on some harder like cuts and movements, so the support just suffers a little because of that. But there are some other features to kind of help with the support specifically. That's going to be the strap that adds some additional lockdown, and you also get an outrigger on that spot that has like the air text kind of built into the midsole. And the midsole also has that like wavy design kind of around the back half that acts as like a heel counter to help keep your foot secure. So I still wouldn't say the support is a bad piece of the shoe. They still hold up pretty solid, at least from what I've noticed. But both of these shoes are going to definitely range on the lighter side, which is great. I mean, the Zoom Freak 3s, they only weigh 404 grams for a size 10.5, and the PG5s are going to weigh just a feather less at 402 grams for the same size. So I mean, two really light shoes to play in. I am definitely a fan of that. To finish off with traction, after stripping the Kobe 9 of its traction pattern and putting it on the PG5s, Nike went with a little bit of a different look for this year's PG6. You have a bunch of little spots kind of sectioned off that still have some arrows built in to help with the front to back end, like your side to side movements. And honestly, I think it's a pretty cool setup. And my initial thoughts are that these do play really well, but I am going to hold off on like my official opinion until I can get into a better gym to kind of test them out. But on the dustier court that I filmed on, they did perform really solid. The grip is definitely there, and some additional rubber was actually used within this outsole that should help with the durability. And the grooves actually do look thicker on this year's model compared to last year's, so using the PG6 outdoors is definitely in play. But now looking at the Zoom Freak 3s, they did fix a few of the inconsistencies from last year's design, but it didn't go away altogether. And honestly, I am pretty tough on these computer generated designs because they just don't usually, play that well for me. So there is some room for improvement on Giannis's line. I've been super impressed with the traction from his models over the last few years. But to finish off with sizing, both of these shoes are going to be good for the length. I'd say both run maybe a little bit on the narrow side, not by a lot, but these aren't going to be a wider fit. So for the final ratings and starting off with the appearance, I don't really love the look for the Zoom Freak 3s, even though I am a big fan of the strap-on basketball shoes, but I do like the PG6. I think this model looks really clean. It's just kind of more drawn to it overall, so I'm going to start off going with PG's line. For cushioning, the PG6 isn't as immediately soft as the 5s, but they still feel really well balanced, and I kind of prefer that just compared to the front-loaded, cushioning setup on the Zoom Freak 3s, so I'm going to go with the PG6 again. For materials, the Zoom Freak 3s did add some nice pieces. I think overall the materials used on the PG6 are an upgrade from the previous model. Neither shoe really feels cheap here, so I'm going to keep this section as a tie. And for the support, the Zoom Freak 3 does have the strap and the outrigger to kind of help there. I'm not in love with the upper materials on the toe box, but I mean, they do move a little bit whenever you're moving around, but not enough to where it really concerned me. And the PG6s, they did lose the outrigger from last year, but the support still holds up solid, so I'm going to keep this section a tie as well. But to finish off with traction, I am going to go back to the PG6 here. There are some inconsistencies that need to be fixed within the Zoom Freak 3 line, but I mean, so far the PG6, it does feel stickier. So that is going to lead me to going with the Nike PG6 as the better shoe to hoop in. While the PG6 doesn't feel quite as soft as the 5s, they still offer a light, supportive feel with some solid traction as well. The Zoom Freak 3, isn't too far behind, but it did feel a little bit worse in most of these categories, but still not a bad shoe overall. Thank you guys for taking some time to watch. If you want to buy the Nike PG6, just click the link on screen, or we have links for both shoes down below or in our bio, so feel free to check that out. But until next review, I'm Landon from Shoeware. Peace.